on Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Kent Merrell, author of The Conquest of Liberty. Welcome, Kent.
It's a pleasure to be here, Terry.
I'm super excited to have you. I loved this book. I also loved your debut novel, which I listened to before I read this one. Great historical fiction. But before we dive into it, what are readers going to find when they open up the cover of your book?
In The Conquest of Liberty, they're going to be instantly introduced to the beginning of the Reformation and the challenges that the Catholic Church was the dominant church, and the various factions, I would say, and their conflict with the reformers. And the book was supposed to be something. It turned out totally different once I started researching. When I began the book, I thought it's going to be the conquest of the Inca Empire. That's what the story was going to be about. Very simple. You're going to have a conquistador rescue an Inca princess. She was going to be sacrificed, and they run off and have a romance in the Andes Mountains. But I couldn't find an honorable conquistador. So obviously that's the fiction part of it. It threw me into this, the 1500s. And so that's what a reader is going to find out. They're going to find out how much they didn't learn in high school.
Exactly.
And they're going to begin questioning, is that true? Is this a real person? Is that a fictional person? Did that really happen? And I asked all those same questions as I began researching. So they're going to be thrown into that. The overall story, and this is book 1 of 4, is going to be the conquest of what it took for mankind to finally be free and self-governing, which we enjoy today. Right. So it's that kind of a conquest.
It is a crazy book in terms of lots of characters, lots of things going on, different locations in the world, trying to figure out how all these moving parts are going to come together. I loved it. But I have to know, as someone who knows nothing about Moors, monarchs, and monks, which is what you subtitle your book, what in the world possessed you to say, this is where I want to land and write?
On this particular book, or right there?
In general, just.
So my very first book several years ago began as a business book. I was going to write about motivation because I've run a business. For my whole career, 40-year career, and running a company, and I thought I could teach people how to motivate employees and children and all that kind of stuff. Well, the book I thought it was going to be great. It started getting dull, and a dear friend of mine read the manuscript and said, "Kent, get rid of all the business stuff in here and stick with this little story that you threw in about pirates." It's like, throw my book away. So I did. So that first book, not a business book anymore. It's just
not even close.
Just a regular old adventure about pirates and treasure and that kind of stuff, which that took me 8 years to write. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, I like this historical fiction. Let me try again. And when I worked in South America for a number of years, I was given a book called The Conquest of Peru. And it was a dense, hard to read book. It sat on my shelf now for 40 years. And I thought, this could be a good story. So I started reading it. And that's what gave me the idea of the Inca Empire, and the conquest by the Spanish. Eventually, I wrote this story. I did the research that I needed to find out what was really happening in Spain and with the Spanish and Europe and King Ferdinand and Columbus and that whole story, and then studied the Inca Empire, which the pre-Columbian era did not have well-written documents. Right. They didn't have any, really. And so that made it a little tougher. But I started reading and finding out, like I mentioned, hunting for a good conquistador. And that threw me right into the courts and the Alhambra and, Granada in Spain, and it fascinated me. And so I wrote this story. I gave it to an editor. It took me about 2 years this time instead of 8.
Instead of 8. Good.
And I gave it to an editor, and the editor read through it, and she was charming and delightful. And she said, Kent, you can't write this book. It's like, what's wrong with it? She goes, this is too big of a story for one book. And I thought, but there's no way I know how to divide it up. And she goes, but you have to. This has to be at least 3 books. And my heart sunk, because I have other books I wanted to write. I didn't want to write 3 books about this thing. So I sat down. I have 5 kids, and they're all readers, very diligent readers. They read mostly fantasy and self-improvement kind of businessy. They go back and forth. No historical fiction in their blood. But I presented this thing to my 4 sons that live here in Utah. And one of them said, yeah, Dad, I think it's a 4-book or 3-book series. Another son who loves series, he goes, Dad, this is 20. Every one of these characters need their own book and backstory.
Right. And you're thinking, no.
Yeah. And another one, the most reasonable of them, he goes, yeah, I think 3 books probably ought to do it for you. And so I thought, okay, it's going to be 3, but then I needed a 4th to give it the good ending.
The ending that you needed.
The ending that I needed. And so then I went back and to my editor, go, so what do I do? He says, this character right here in this book you've written needs the complete backstory. And that's book 1. That's the one you've read. Was the new book I came back and wrote. So book 2 is what was the first book I actually wrote.
Okay.
So it's basically a prequel, but that's what you've read. And so that became the story of how these people
got to the place where book 2 starts.
Right. So how did these characters get to where, the conquest of Peru can take place? So book 2 then is the follow-up. It's a continuing story with all the characters and bringing through. And then book 3 will be continuing through and, finish that overall conquest. And then book 4 will finally be a happy ending. There's happiness throughout, of course.
Yeah, there is. There is.
My wife wouldn't read it. So
wouldn't she really? No, I found it to be utterly fascinating. And I know so little about that period of time. Like so little. And the number of things that I'd be listening and I'd think, how did I miss that? Like I took world history. I took world history in college. It's not like but there's whole sections of world history that apparently I know nothing about. And this would be one of them.
And that's one of the lures for me is I can get away with a lot.
Yeah. People aren't going to look at you and say, Kent, that did not happen, because they have no idea.
I'm actually hoping that somebody will come back and challenge me on things, because that means somebody who knows history actually
read it. Right.
But that's one of the things I read. I have read several of Ken Follett's historical fiction.
Yes.
And, his books are like this thick.
Yes.
And so it takes a long time. And one of the things, then I also took one of his online courses about writing. And his philosophy was, you can't write a real character and create a life for them that's not true to history. And it's that kind of a philosophy. And I thought,
right.
Yes, I can. I'm not going to be dishonest with the stories,
right?
But I have enjoyed bringing some of these characters to life based on what history I have and what it actually means. So the good and the bad of some characters is true to history, and I just elaborate a little.
Right, and I think that's what historical fiction is. There's the history part, and then there's the fiction part. And the history part, I always say, is I try to do my very best to keep my history accurate, to make sure that whatever my character is doing could have been done based on what's going on in history, and could have been done based on what we do know about the character. And then everything else I get to make up, because we have no idea what actually happened every single day. And we have no idea what actually, and we know bits and pieces. And how did they get from point A to point B? Well, I get to make that up.
That's true. So we're totally
good.
In agreement with that point.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the research. Like, you looked at a big book that you had sitting on your shelf for 40 years, but what else did you do to get yourself? You have a lot of good information in there that's obviously real, but how did you find it all without, like, to me, that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a whole period I don't know.
So to begin with, having lived in South America and gone back and visited many of those countries, Peru and Bolivia and Chile, and having been there, I had a feel for the people and the locations.
Okay.
And then a lot of this takes place in Spain. I've spent some time there. Those are mostly vacations. I haven't lived there. There in France and Germany and some Italy. So I wasn't afraid to dive into those kind of places.
Okay.
and include the story. Now, there does take place in Northern Africa, and I'm trying to talk my wife into taking a cruise to go visit,
right.
Algeria and Morocco, I mean.
Yeah.
So anyway, to do the research, I would start the story, and then I would go look it up, try to find out about a location. And for instance, at one point, I needed to get one of my characters from Almeria, Spain, on the coast of Spain, to Italy. And I thought, okay, I need an adventure between point A and point B here, because this character has to get to the story. The story is basically about a young Spanish, basically he's a linguist. He's an assistant to an archbishop. And the true part of the story is that archbishop was arrested by the cardinal.
Okay.
And put in prison. And that he had to get out of prison at the Pope's command. So my fictional character, had to get to Rome, get the pardon from the Pope, and get back and save this archbishop. That's the historical. So it's like, okay, how do I get my guy to Rome and back? And so once they got into, leaving from the south of Spain, how do I get him there with some action?
Right.
That's where I would go do some hunting. I need to find a pirate that was in 1510, that's a legitimate pirate that can capture his ship and start this adventure. Well, not start it. There's a lot of adventures that's
right.
And I found Saida Al-Hura. And I read this biography about her. She was a queen and a corsair, and the Spanish and the Portuguese hated her because she was the pirate of the Western Mediterranean. That's my girl.
That's it. Yeah. Don't you love it when you find that piece of information that's going to move your story forward?
That is the thrill. It
is. I'll be reading through and look, and it's like, oh, that's it. That's what's going to happen next. I know now. And it's just, it's a fabulous feeling.
And my poor wife has to live through that excitement.
Yeah.
Hey, you never guess what I found.
And she's like, I don't care.
and then she learns more about it. And so then that character comes to life. The problem is I keep finding fascinating, interesting people.
Yeah.
In the very first book, The Blade of Safavid, which was the pirate chase,
yeah.
I needed a fictional character to confiscate a ship. Well, I had to learn about somebody that had a ship that was big enough and good enough. And this obscure little captain, he's a Portuguese captain. And so I researched him and found out this guy's great. I mean, he's only mentioned once in the book, but that didn't stop me from making a whole video about him.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other thing that you have to be careful, or at least I do. I could get really lost in the research rabbit hole. I love research. I enjoy learning new things. I've always been an avid learner. And so I'll get down this rabbit hole, which then leads me over here and then down to here. And the next thing you know, I'm so far off topic, but I've been having fun for hours, and it's like, okay, Terry, rein it back in. It's time to get back to the topic on hand here. So,
and that's it. So I get to a point where, okay, in book 2, the next one that's at a final editor right now, it's gone through, and by the way, I dislike editing.
Okay.
I just want to write it and then publish it and enjoy.
You just want to be done, right?
So it has a character in there that I fell in love with, a real live one by the name of William Tyndale. You may have heard of him. He's the one that translated the Bible from Greek and Hebrew.
Oh, okay.
So I got into his life because he makes a cameo appearance in book 2. And I literally had to stop and say, Kent, the book is not about him.
I know.
He's got to go away, and the rest of this book, he is not part of the book anymore. And it's painful because now
it is.
How can I write a book about him? Because it was so fascinating what he did. So the cameo characters that come and go probably distract some from my story, but I can't help myself.
Yeah, I understand. I call myself a research junkie, and I use that as a hashtag. So feel free to also use it as a hashtag, because I think that we're maybe in the same field there when it comes to, oh my gosh, look what I'm finding. So I want to know, you've got lots of great characters. I want to know which one is your favorite character that you've written in this book 1, and then why that person is your favorite character.
I think my favorite fictional character in book 1, and I'm sad to say he doesn't get to go all the way through, was just a throwaway character by the name of Halaf. It's Jalaf. And he was just a guy that I had to help get a character from downstairs to upstairs. But I liked him. And so I wish he could be in all the books.
Well, maybe you'll bring him back. Maybe he'll be a character in some other book that you write. You never know.
He's a Morisco, he was an Arab Moor living in Spain who was converted, was baptized, and he didn't get baptized because he believes in the Savior. He's always following Allah and teasing about the difference between Allah and Jehovah, because the Christ, and going through that kind of thing. So I really liked him. The other one, historical character, which is Vasco Nunez de Balboa, which I fell in love with him. So talk about a conquistador that is genuinely a great man. And yes, his sword ended the life of a handful of natives, but far less than anybody else. And he was just a genuine great leader, and was betrayed and in real life and stuff. So there are a few that I fall in love with.
The one character that I really loved was Alessandro, especially as that precocious child. So was that a real person, or
no,
was that made up in your mind? Okay.
He's completely fiction.
Okay. Well, I loved him. And it's, like I said, especially as the little boy. We see him later now as a man, but as this little boy, I don't know, I just fell in love with him. He was so precocious, and I just thought, can you imagine, here he is standing up with Balboa and asking all these questions and kind of like inserting himself into everything. What do you think? What do you think? And I don't know, I loved his character. So
yeah, he was fun, and he's one that if you liked him, you'll like the rest of the books, because he's a solid character throughout. And he has some of that precociousness in the next 2 books too.
Okay, awesome. So it's an excellent story. But is there more than that you want readers to walk away with? Like, they're going to come away with a good book, but is there something else you'd love them to walk away and be thinking about, or wondering about, or contemplating in their life?
If I had my way, the readers with this book and the others would come away with a sense of wonder on how special it really is for us to have freedom, for us to realize what it took to get from the feudal system through the conquests to where we have a Constitution of the United States that's 250 years old next year, and what that freedom has done to us, for us, and the whole world, because it's priceless. But a lot of lives were lost in that
Right.
battle.
Right. It wasn't pretty getting there.
No.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the hard challenges. It's like, how do I defend the conquest where so many people died, so much suffering took place?
Right.
And with not just the Spanish, I poke the Christians a bit in this book. My wife said, I don't think the Catholics are going to like this very much. And I said, well, there was a time when they were hijacked back in those days. And during that time, there was bloodshed and on almost every front. The natives, the indigenous people, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, there were some great, honorable people there. Mm-hmm. And there were some that weren't.
But isn't that true in every society?
It is, absolutely.
Throughout all time. And
so to try to paint that picture with the long-term success of it all, I would like to sit down with, our creator one day and say, how did you live through this? How come your heart's not totally broken?
Exactly.
Watching
that. Exactly.
Yeah. But yet, in one of the points I make in the book, which I hope is clear, is that if we have our agency to choose, we can choose bad too.
Right.
And then people suffer.
Exactly. So I'm curious if you are a pantser or a plotter.
Oh, definitely a pantser.
You're a pantser.
My very first book, when I was done after 8 years, I didn't know how it was going to end. The morning I got up and sat in my big red chair with my laptop. When it was done, I said, the end is like, oh, well, that's how it ends. And I got up and had breakfast with my wife. And I don't know. Okay, book 2 is written. Book 3, I know what has to happen, but I don't know how.
You don't know how it's going to get there.
And it just writes.
I am also a pantser, and I'm very much a pantser. And I have tried being a plotter because I've been told that that's the better way to write. And it doesn't work for me at all. I'm curious, have you tried any plotting? Have you tried to do it? Or have you just said, I'm obviously a pantser and that's the way I'm going to be?
I just accepted the fact that I'm a pantser. and that's part of the fun, is the discovery.
Yeah, for me it is too. And I tell people, I think that as a pantser, it's not that I don't plot. I just plot after the fact. I have to go back, and now that's that editing part that you don't like. And that's where you're going in and you're saying, okay, it needs more here and less here. And what is this character doing? And all of the things that I think plotters do kind of on the front end, I have to go back on the back end and say, okay, now I got to clean up this thing that kind of came out. But I'm happy to hear that you don't know the ending of your story, because I don't. And I start getting a little nervous. It's like, is this ever going to wrap up?
and the readers think that too. Oh, sure.
Yeah, and then my editor says things like, Terry, you wandered in the woods for a really long time there. And it's like, okay. And then I have to go back and make some changes, because I really was wandering around trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And it's like, well, let's look behind this tree,
Yeah.
So that's great. I love that.
On my book 2, the one that's at the editor now, when it was done, I was very unsatisfied. And so I asked the editor, I said, I don't know what to do with this. It's ended, it's good, it's solid, but it didn't do anything for me. And I don't know how to write a sequel. I don't know how to write book 1, 2, 3, because I feel like I'm a cheater. It's like, there's more. It's like I'm a direct marketer, and there's more.
And there's more.
And she simply said, take chapter 51 and make it chapter 50. And take chapter 49 and make it chapter, just rearrange these last 3 chapters. And I did. And it's like, oh, okay.
Oh, now it feels so much better. Yeah.
So it was like, just the editor had to fix my pantsing.
Right. Well, and I love that about the editing process. It is hard to edit. There's something about, the joy for me is in the writing. The editing is that thing you have to do in order to get your joy out into the world. But I love having a good editor because they do find things and help me recognize things that make my book so much better.
Oh, for sure.
That I didn't notice, that I couldn't figure out on my own. In my mind, it worked, but it's because I know my story intimately and I know my characters intimately, and I wasn't giving my reader everything they needed, but I was unaware of it. And so I love having a good editor.
Yeah, they're priceless.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What about your writing life, Kent? Are you a daily writer? How does that look for you?
The first book, I was full-time employed. I run an advertising agency and have done for my whole career. And so I would write each morning, pretty disciplined, for 15 to 35, 45 minutes, depending on what I could fit in. So I'd get up early. I go through my routines in the morning and I would sit down and write. And then I'd go about life. So it took me a long time.
Right.
But in the next book, I learned how to take 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there and steal some and get whatever I could. And sometimes I could write for a few hours, and sometimes it was 5 minutes where I'd jot down a thought. Now, because I've been around long enough, I'm able to, I let go my biggest client, which was about time. And so from the first of this year, from January 1, I've called myself a full-time writer. And I'm actually working on 5 books this year. There's a memoir. There's a religious book that I'm writing, and there's a leadership book, which I really wanted to write way long time ago, and then the historical fiction that's just gone to it's at the editor,
right?
And then book 3. Now I don't know if I'll get all 5 done, but I'm sure hoping. So I've divided up my week in I work on one of these 5 plus the historical fiction.
Okay.
So each morning I have to move one of these projects along. A book that's going to be really fun this fall is the leadership book. It's called Leader Chip Cookies. Now,
I saw that in your bio, and I'm curious about that.
So just in case you're wondering, do we need another leadership book? No, there's 800 gazillion of them. And is anybody going to read them all? No. But I ended up with a cousin of mine who was a master leadership executive trainer. And he gave me everything he had. So a dozen years ago, I indulged in all of his work, and I realized nobody tells the whole story. And he does. And anybody who thinks they know anything about leadership are going to say that. And I can't say that I know it, but he had it. He's passed away now. But I've digested all of his stuff. So how do I share this? I can't even share this with my children. My 4 sons are all kind of in leadership positions in their companies. Like, how do I share this with them? So I finally concluded that there's 6 principles of leadership, and there's 6 main ingredients in a chocolate chip cookie. So it's like there's leader chip cookies. So basically there's 50 different chocolate chip cookie recipes.
Right.
And each one is tied to one of these principles or doctrines or something of leadership. It's like,
how fun.
And so it's going to be fun. If you don't care about the leadership stuff,
you'll still get a good cookie recipe out of it.
You can figure them out. I mean, we've got every kind you can imagine coming through here. So that's just a fun project that I get to work on every day too. So
absolutely.
So you asked the question about full-time writing. Yeah, I'm full-time writing something.
Okay. Yeah. See, I'm what I call a binge writer. I think about writing a lot, and I've got ideas percolating in my mind, but when I sit down, I want a long period of time and I want no one to bother me. And I'll sit down for hours and hours and hours, and I just get it all out. And then I wander around and I don't write for days. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have something again. And I sit down and I write and I write and I write. So I'm a horrible pantser binge writer, which according to anybody who has made it big, they say that's not the way to do it. But I have to kind of go with what works for me.
So what are you working on right now?
Well, my husband passed away in January. And so I've it's been hard to write. I haven't had a lot to say. However, I was working on I don't know, it's kind of like a comedy with a dash of romance. It's about a woman going through menopause, and it's just the funny things about like losing her phone all the time and gaining the weight and being forgetful and the hot flashes that come out of nowhere. And it's just a funny look, kind of a tongue-in-cheek look at this woman. My problem is that it's humorous, and I haven't been feeling overly humorous in the last couple of months. So I'm hoping that soon, because I have had some ideas recently, and I'm hoping that maybe soon I'll be able to sit down and finish that. But I have another historical fiction in my mind. I have a whole list of stories that they'll come to my mind, and I just write them down because unlike you, I can't write that many things at the same time. I would go crazy. So, yeah.
Well, hurry and finish that book. I think I would enjoy that. Having lived with I have a fantastic wife who went through those. I think I would enjoy that. The humor. She would probably enjoy it too.
Yes. So, what's funny is the book came to me, the idea came to me because I used to read the book, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, when I was, a preteen. And that was turned into a movie. And this little girl, Margaret, is about to go through puberty. And that's pretty much what this whole thing is about. Well, they turned it into a movie. I read an article or something with the author. And my thought was, wonder whatever happened to Margaret. And my next thought was, she now goes by Peg and she's going through menopause. And that's kind of where the book just I don't know, it was just like born right in my head immediately. So
what a great idea.
But a lot of my stories come to me with the what ifs. Like, well, what would happen if? And then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, I have a story idea. So that's kind of what I do. You told us what's coming up next. Are you like me? Do you have a big list of other stories that you want to write once this big series is out of the way?
I do. And it's more stories than I have life left in me.
Right.
But I do, like you mentioned, I want to do a romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but you're a historical fiction guy. So I've decided I'm going to place it in the 1700s in Poland.
Okay. Hey, why not, right? So, that's one of the things that people have tried to place me as a historical fiction, because my first three fall into that category, although I didn't write them to be that. I wrote my stories and that's what they were. And I tell people that what I actually am is a character-driven fiction author. Mm-hmm. If you like a good character, then you'll like to read my books and come along on that journey with the characters. And so I really fight against someone telling me, well, you're a historical fiction. It's like, don't tell me what I am. I know what I am. I'm an author and I have ideas. That's
what got you started writing?
I think I always wanted to write. It was just like a little bug. And I got out of a really horrible relationship and started writing manuscripts. And when my husband and I started dating, we ended up getting married and then riding across the United States on a tandem bicycle.
Oh, wow.
So we rode from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. And in that period of time, I realized that I was capable of doing anything I put my mind to. And what was it that I wanted to do? And the answer was, I want to be an author. And 14 months later, my first book came out. Oh. So, I mean, it was this is what I want to do. And why haven't I been doing it? And so I just went right into it, and there you have it. So, yeah, crazy, isn't it?
That's great. So what's the name of that book? I need to read it.
Oh, 10 Little Rules for a Double-Butted Adventure.
What a great title.
Yeah, so it's 10 things I learned about life while riding across the United States. So, yeah, 10 Little Rules for a Double-Butted.
Who got to drive?
My husband, he is a avid cyclist. He rode for years and years and years and did bicycle racing and other things. And I, when I met him, had not been on a bicycle in 40 years.
Wow.
So I was the back, and I pedaled and I pedaled and I pedaled and I pedaled, and I let him deal with all of the other things that a novice cyclist shouldn't be in charge of. So So, hey guys, if you want to continue this conversation, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook, and there you'll have the opportunity to win a digital copy of The Conquest of Liberty. Tell me something that you liked or learned in this podcast, and you will be in the running. So, Kent, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, talk with you about one of your books or one of your writing ideas that's coming up, how do they do that?
The most comprehensive is going to be, I have a Substack, which is Kent Merrell, KentMerrell.substack.com. I found that as a great way to kind of put all of my writings together. And I write stuff all the time. And it's some of it about the leadership cookies, some's about my historical fiction, some's just about life and those kind of things.
Right.
So you can find it all there. But my website for being the author is KentMerrellAuthor.com.
Super.
That's more about the books themselves.
Super. So guys, I'll have all of those links in the show notes. So make sure that you take a look there. Kent, it was a fabulous book.
I appreciate this interview. Thank you.
Yeah. And readers, run out and grab it. You're really going to like it. And I want to thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Terry. It's been a pleasure for me.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.